It's absolutely insane that we are already commenting on week 3 of Inktober, or Cattober as I like to say. I feel like this year's challenge is going both so fast and so quick at the same time. I have this realization every year that whenever Inktober comes around, I'm like, a month has 30 days or 31, and that is a lot of time to do things, while also having all the other commitments that then make me say that that is not a lot of time at all. But still, we are here to comment and yap on the pictures that I have drawn for week 3 for my monthly challenge of Inktober that I make with the lovely Candiii called Cattober, which is basically our version of OCtober and Inktober just put together into one. And so if you want to listen to me yap and talk about characters and have a good time, maybe consider grabbing a snack, maybe consider having some tea or whatever type of drink you prefer to have while listening to long form videos, and then I will keep you company for the next hour or so. I doubt anyone will want to sit here for the next hour or so, but well, the intention is there. If you wish to sit here with my company, here I am. So as some of you know, my name is Taddy, or Quill and Canvas, as I go on some of my other social media, and for more than 10 years I have been an artist on various platforms off and on. I live with a lot of self-doubt, so I just don't think that it's worth people's time, or even my own sometimes, to be making content. But then I look back at my finished videos, and even if just one person watches them, or even if I get just one like, it fills me with a lot of joy. So I'm going to sit here and talk about the characters, and if you enjoy listening to me yapping while you're doing something else, that's great too. So for day 13, which is Song, I am actually drawing Iris, or Soo-hyun. Now in this form, his name is actually Iris because yes, this is a male character, but he has this alter ego whose name is Iris, of course, and that he uses to perform at a local club in his local town called the Amethyst Club. Now this character is actually related to Les's family line. Some of you might remember Lessa, or Alexei. He's one of the oldest characters featured on this channel, and actually Iris is the partner and later husband of Lessa's great-grand uncle, because Sanya, who is Iris's partner and beloved, is actually first cousins with Lessa's great-grandfather, who, you guessed it, is also named Alexei. For this reason, I wanted to have a little bit of connection between Soo-hyun and Dae-yeon, who then becomes Lessa's beloved, of course. They aren't related by family or by blood or by any of these means and elements, but they do share similarities in how they look, and of course Sanya and Lessa also have similarities in their personalities and how they act. They are both incredibly sweet, but there are many main differences. As I was saying, Iris is actually a performer, and though he performs at the Amethyst Club, his dream is actually to be a singer. And Sanya, on the other hand, is a lawyer, so he belongs to a completely different field. But even though his job and his field of work is that of law, he is actually also an artist. He is a painter, and he does that in his spare time. Actually, I really do like the way that Sanya and Iris interact and meet with one another, because Sanya is not necessarily bullied, because we are like talking about adult characters. Not that adults can't be bullied, we can all be bullied, but like it's not your typical high school age situation drama where he gets bullied. It's more so that he is a very quiet person, and he doesn't necessarily get along with many of the co-workers at the law firm that he works at, and for that reason they try to tease him and invite him to a special event that is going to be held at the Amethyst Club. And while all of the co-workers that Sanya has are aware aware of Iris and know who Iris is, Sonia has never seen him or met him or never even heard of him, though he's heard the people speak of the Amethyst Club in the parking lot of his job before. He's never really learned too much about it. And we're talking about the 1940s here, so the post-war period, so it is basically one of the few things that the people were doing to try and get distracted from everything that had happened. I wouldn't say that it's exactly precisely a verbatim reproduction of what we've had in our world, but it is definitely a uchronia, so something that is heavily based with minor changes and with elements that are inspired from our world and the way that it is organized. So Sonia is invited by one of his co-workers to go to the Amethyst Club, and at first he actually refuses because he believes that it will be a waste of time and that the people are just inviting him to make fun of him, which he is not wrong about, by the way. They mostly just want to embarrass him, but he does go in the end. He accepts, especially because he has a very supportive family. He has 3 lovely sisters and a father that adores him very much, and so he ends up accepting to go. And once he goes there, he actually ends up seeing the very first performance from Iris and falls in love with him at first sight, even though he doesn't realize it right away, and the rest is history. I think that art-wise I could have pushed this picture a little bit more. I think that the background is a little bit too generic, and even Iris should have looked prettier than I actually made him look. But I did draw this when I was having a terrible case of food poisoning, so I think I am a little bit more justified. But still, I really do want to draw more of Iris and Sonia because they are an absolutely adorable ship, and I just want to say more about them. I love them very, very much. This next prompt is day 14 past, and this one feels like one of those pictures that I would need an entire podcast episode to try and somewhat scratch the surface of the lore of the story that's behind it. It's just because whenever I create a story, and I do this with Candiii a lot because I feel like at first she was a little bit more further away from this style of creative writing, and then as years went on she really got the hang of it as well. But one thing that I really do a lot is to create an entire universe or world or setting that goes along with that specific story. It's my favorite part. Sometimes I like to say that what I like to write about or talk about or draw about is people that I have picked within that specific universe, but that I have picked at random. So there is the life that they're living, the world that they are in, the situations and problems that they're forced to face, and I picked one of them and decided to narrate their story because I feel like every person's story is important. Everyone has a story, and by having that type of approach, it's a lot easier to just sit back and realize that things sometimes just happen, and we are all the embodiment of the feelings and reactions that we've had through all of the hardships and all of the things that we've been subjected to. And this is exactly the feeling I have whenever I think of Dome, and that is because Dome as a story is divided into 2 main sections. So the first one is Out of the Dome, and that one is the main storyline, which follows a main character called Daniel Daslakhanov, and the other one is the prequel to this story, which follows Orif Daslakhanov and his family. Now, of course, you will have realized that they have the same last name, and that is because Orif is actually Daniel's uncle. He is his mother's older brother, and he is actually the little baby in this photograph. Well, in the drawing, but that I assume is somewhat of a photograph. And he is with his parents, Alia and Daniel Sr. His father was also called Daniel, and usually when Candiii and I talk about them, we will differentiate by talking about Daniel as Daniel and Daniel Daslakhanov, the protagonist of Dome, as Danny. Well, just normal Danny, but we like to make fun of him a little bit by having a little bit of a singy-songy twist to his name, because he's a very cute and hyperactive child when he's a little boy, and so he introduces himself as I'm Danny. So anyways, about this picture, To be fair, I wanted this to be a picture where Orif and his parents are just enjoying a spontaneous night out. So his dad comes back from work and he's seen on his way home that there is a carnival that is starting to be built up and put together where people are reuniting and having a good time. And so he suggests that he, his son, and his lovely and loving wife, this woman destroys me, her character destroys me, should go and have a look around at the carnival. Now, these three, this lovely family, lives in a country and in a city in particular that goes by the name of Rishka. And this is a universe that I have created that actually has some bits of elements that are true to real life. Of course, we know that there are invasions, occupations, all of these matters that are happening in real life right now. And in the sequel Dome, I mostly wanted to tackle the issue of societal differences, societal classes. So both of them have very heavy themes that go into them that are seen through the eyes of normal people. Now, this picture in particular, it features, like I said, Orif and his parents, and the area that they are living in, the capital city of their country, being Rishka, was actually occupied many years prior with a war. The war was lost, and so now the city itself has been divided into two parts. For all of you who are familiar, of course, with World War II and the Berlin Wall, you might start to see some of the elements that are taken. However, in Rishka, the wall that separates the two areas of the city doesn't split the country into two different countries or two different hemispheres. It actually just separates the inhabitants of it. So those who are descendants of the people that actually were in Rishka to begin with are on one side, and the invaders are on the other side. While the project of those that invaded was, of course, a project of quote-unquote peace, the peace is never really reached, and there is naturally conflict within the two parts. Those that live in the area where the original people of the land live are somewhat forced and pushed into position of less merit and mistreated, whereas the people that have invaded the land are now having all of the possibilities to do whatever they want, especially because we're talking about a world that doesn't really have the ideas of sanctions or help from outside instances and outside situations. Of course, there are other countries within this universe itself that do speak on one side or the other, but naturally that doesn't really always go according to plan, nor does it always really affect the life of the common people that have to deal with these types of horrible situations, which again, even to this day and in specific situation, the normal, very, how can I say, average common people are often forgot and their struggles are not contemplated, and that is absolutely atrocious and it shouldn't be the case. And I think that telling stories that have elements, more so even from personal experience in Dome though, so the sequel of this, because I would never act like I have experienced any of the things that Orif here and his family have experienced, but I do have experiences with the second half of the story, so with the societal pressure and issues within the same country. I do believe it's important to tell these types of stories and to let people know exactly what happens even when they wish to look away, and I think that these two stories are exactly that. I also wish to show the depth and the psychology of various characters and how they handle specific things, because as I was saying, the people here are then divided into these two areas specifically, and while of course many just choose to look at things in the most positive way, for example, Daniel here, Orif's dad, he's had terrible things happen to him in the past and to his family. He unfortunately no longer has family at this point in time other than his grandfather. But despite this, he really believes in the idea of coexistence and in the idea of bettering oneself and helping other people better themselves, and thus he refutes any sort of violence. His wife, Alia, on the other hand, which we are looking at right now here, while she agrees with him and she tends to somewhat soften after she marries him, she is a little bit different in her points of view. She actually believes that people should be paid back with some of the things that were done to them. Of course, this type of reasoning always brings you to the moral dilemma of when does it stop? If you do something to me and I do something back to you, then the moral question is, how do we stop it? And is it really, truly a right of mine to do something back to you if you have done something horrible to me? And while, of course, it's very easy to sit back and say that is morally wrong and morally incorrect, I do believe that while I am not going into full details as to what is happening with those characters and what has happened to them in the past, I do believe they have all the right to harbor, at the very least, resentment towards the people that have shunned them in their own rights. So in not even necessarily into the division of the city, but more so in the rights that they have lost when said city was invaded years prior. Of course, as per many of the situations that have happened in Europe and elsewhere throughout these times in history, they do go through some very dark times. A lot of the times, many of the criminal acts that take place within the city walls are blamed on these people, of course, and there is a terrible event that is known throughout the history of Rishka as the Great Purge. Again, for those who are historical nerds, you will realize and understand how respectfully I try to treat all of the themes that I put within stories and the novels that will come from them. But unfortunately, one of the people that does fall victim to this and falls victim to it specifically due to corruption that I will not necessarily spoil right now or talk too much in is Daniel, and this contributes to the disillusion that Orth begins to feel when he becomes a little bit older, like a little bit of an older teenager, because this does happen when he is 16, and so the entirety of the family is forced to face something else entirely, and for this very reason he ends up developing new ideas and new reactions to the world around him, to the point that he wishes to, of course, take matters into his own hands and actually make a difference. Now, for the art part of this drawing, I do like it. I do think that it came out really cute. It does look like a little illustration. If you've ever looked into those Danmei novels, I feel like it looked like those illustrations that are in the inside cover. So I do like it. I do think I could have pushed it just a little bit more, but overall, I do think it looks really nice, and I love these characters. I can't wait to talk more about them and actually deep dive into their story with the actual writings of them that I do with Candiii, and I really hope people will see the amount of effort and respect and thought that is put into them, because I think that many stories of this type and kind should be told and should be looked at and read with extreme caution, especially even due to things that have been happening recently in the world. This next piece for day 15 is actually completely different from the two previous ones. It is incredibly fuzzy and warm and colorful, and even though I actually wasn't really a fan of this picture at first, especially when I see it in the tiny little thumbnail file of my folder, I have to admit it does look quite cute when I think of the story behind it, and these two are very loving and lovely, and so they deserve the attention and love that they got on this picture, because it was actually quite liked on my other social media, and I think that that's really sweet. So this features our two oldest vampire characters, Akihiko and Bethuel, and Akihiko was actually designed by Candiii, of course, and for that very reason he actually is wearing this traditionally red wedding outfit, like wedding clothing. I don't want to use a technical term because I might be wrong in how it's called in the different cultures within East Asia, and so I don't want to be disrespectful, but I do know that in some traditional clothing, especially from ancient China, it seems they used to have this very typical, very bright red gown for red robes or gowns, I suppose, for weddings. And since Akihiko has both origins and roots in the Chinese culture and in the Japanese culture, we decided to draw him with these robes on, and she told me that he would wear some that were particularly, elegant and with various layers, and I just thought he looked so beautiful and I couldn't resist, especially because Bethiel is in love with him from the very moment that he sees him. Now, Bethiel and Akihiko, like I said, are actually two of the oldest vampires from our vampire story. I say vampire story, but they do basically live in our recreation of Earth in a way to make it easier to understand the planes. And so Bethiel actually meets Akihiko after he has gone and hidden in the mountains to be by himself and alone for a while. And Bethiel at that time in his life was also basically roaming the world alone and with nobody else to be around with, and so he ended up meeting Akihiko and decided it'd be best to perhaps ask him if he wished to be travel companions or travel buddies. And this is actually very sweet because Bethiel is somebody that was actually shunned away from his family. This isn't particularly due to any reason. His family and him actually just had very incredibly different views, and for that reason he somewhat became independent, and then after many events he ended up turning into a vampire, and from there on the rest is history. He was basically just traveling, trying to find a place in the world, trying to find somebody just like him, because he couldn't really find a vampire. And though of course he could just find somebody he has chemistry with and eventually turn them into vampires, I think that he was looking for somebody specifically who had the same type of situation as him. So they were already vampires, perhaps looking for companionship in the world to not feel as alone as they were feeling at the moment that they met. And he finds this in Akihiko. Now, Akihiko is going through his own sets of struggles, and he too happens to be particularly lonely. And so when Bethiel shows up, while he does agree to travel with him, and it seems that from what Candiii has told me, he does believe that he is rather good looking and likes his company, he is a little bit more on the fence at first, whereas Bethiel is completely lost in him. He believes he's the prettiest person he's ever seen, that he's absolutely beautiful, and is basically head over heels in love with this man. And he's actually very romantic, but never pushy. I do think that Bethiel is very gentleman-like in that sense. He would tell him that he feels attracted to him and that he really likes him, but he would never enforce anything. And if Akihiko even asked him to leave, he probably would. No matter how brokenhearted he was, he absolutely would put down the flowers of flirtation and would leave. However, the two of them actually stick together for a while, for well over a century, until Bethiel actually feels comfortable enough to tell Akihiko that not only does he feel attracted to him and finds him beautiful and adores to be partners as they are, because they started being a little bit more romantically involved throughout the century, he just tells him that he wishes for them to be together forever, so to be married and to be vampires for as long as the universe allows, of course. And to his extreme surprise, though Akihiko at first isn't sure what to say, or perhaps he's sure what to say, but he didn't expect the situation to unfold the way that it did, he takes the slightest pause, Candiii told me, but like really small. He's just like trying to understand what's happening. And Bethiel is like, well, that's all right. I will not be forcing you and I will leave the room. No, but all things aside, Akihiko obviously, as you can see from this picture, does accept to be with Bethuel, and the two of them are still together to this day. They are actually still there, they are strong and going, and I do believe that they are a really cute couple, especially because with how calm and collected Akihiko is and how extremely flamboyant and dramatic Bethuel tends to be, they tend to bring a really nice element of flair and interest in the vampire household and in the vampire story that I think really balances out everything else and everyone else in the story. Because if you've seen my previous video, Jacques, who is the vampire that I drew for Day 9 Graceful, for example, is another extremely flamboyant vampire who is particularly fun to be around, and yet is still completely different from Bethuel, because Bethuel is one of those people that you would deem as either boring or serious or a little strange or even dangerous, and then when you talk to them, you're like, oh, he's a goofball idiot type of person. And he's happy with that, but for this very reason, we tend to call the two of them, Akihiko and Bethuel, the parents of the vampire group, because that's how they act, and Akihiko is always there giving Bethuel support and just being there caring for everyone. He also is very much the type of person that is extremely elegant and is very drawn to flowers and plants and colors, and that just gives into that type of aesthetic of Bethuel looking a little bit like a stereotypical vampire, I suppose, and I wanted it to be that way. I think that when he was a human, people often looked at him and thought him a strange person or a weirdo because he was definitely into particular things. He loved history, he loved magic, he loved all things that would be considered taboo. I do think that Bethuel was born around the 16th century or the 15th century even, so of course people would deem him somewhat strange, and for that very reason he was almost somewhat destined to become something like a vampire. And that way, he actually finds his perfect other half in Akihiko, who instead is a little bit more of a rational, realist person and helps him stay on track with his thoughts and his opinions and everything that he has to do. Because I do believe that Bethuel is unorganized chaos, but with very good intentions and with a very good heart. And Akihiko is a very good mind and a soft heart that manages to keep all of Bethuel's chaos in check. I think that that's the best way to describe their love story. Though I was a little bit concerned with the way that the picture would look in the end, mostly because I feel like I am pretty bad with bright colors. I have a little bit of a struggle when it comes to like layering and shading colors such as bright red and bright purples and all of these types of shades that have a little bit more of a warmth to them. I do believe that it came out looking pretty decent. I actually really like the shading of the skin and the hair on Bethuel, which you're seeing right now. And I know that when shading red, one is supposed to use other colors, such as, again, a deeper violet or a deeper purple or whatever else that could bring out some of the elements that are within the very bright red. But at first, I really wasn't sure how to not make it all look a little bit like a blob, and that was my main fear. I didn't want all the colors to all blend together, but in the end, I think that there is enough contrast between the two figures, and considering this is a picture that focuses mostly on them together as a couple, I do believe that it's not too bad. It could have been worse, it could have been better, but Inktober is also this. It's also the idea of experimenting and trying things that one wouldn't normally try, and just try to push one's limits and boundaries to see just where they can push their artistic ability and see if they are able to bring out something else that they normally wouldn't draw. And I can say for sure that this wouldn't have been something that I would have normally drawn because, again, I tend to shy away from these types of bright shades, and I actually really admire artists who can work incredibly with them. Like, it's no issue. Even Candiii, she can shade them, make them look deep, even without using too much in the shading sometimes, even when she does flats. It's such an amazing way of using colors to show depth and importance within a piece. And again, I think it's really admirable to be able to do that in a way that isn't heavy or a little bit like overboard. And I definitely think that if I hadn't stopped here, I would have tried to go overboard because I feel like it's unshaded or something. But I'm glad I stopped and that they are here in the picture at the moment that I stopped, because while I wanted to add a little bit more of a pattern and other elements to the robe and the dress, I will also say that time was of the essence, and I didn't have all of that time left to sit there and make this incredibly detailed, because as I said, this was my second attempt for this prompt, so I had to be quick, I had to be fast, and I just decided to go with whatever looked best without going overboard and with what wouldn't have me restart all over again from scratch, because that would have been an absolute nightmare. And knowing me, if I had looked at some patterns or anything else that I could have possibly added to Akihiko's robes, I would have probably never stopped for the next 4 or 5 hours, and that was not possible considering I had to post this before midnight. Which, by the way, if any of you is interested, I do have shorter versions of these clips both on my shorts and on other socials, and I do have all of the final pictures posted on my Kara, on my Blue Sky, and on my DeviantArt, and I will be putting them both in the description and here on the screen for you to go look at right now, so that if you wish to have a closer look to any of them, you can absolutely feel free to do so. We are now going on to day 16, Glisten, and the protagonist of this piece is actually King Hamaliel Metriel of the Glauci of the Kingdom of Harlarak. We are back into the realm of Esmeralda, and we hadn't been here in a few pictures actually. This entire week 3, we haven't gone to Esmeralda realm yet. We have gone to all of these other ones that I feel like are a little bit more not necessarily modern based, but they are more contemporary or have historical roots, whereas Esmeralda is high fantasy with elements of history, and I am so here for it. It's such a nice pleasure to sit back and look at all of the stories and families and people and worlds connect together and create situations that have cause and effect, and I love it a lot. It's just, I am a nerd, as you can see from the channel as a whole and from listening to me yap. I am a history nerd, I am a language nerd. No wonder I would just sit here and have a whole geo-asset class about the worlds that Candiii and I create. But still, this is Hamaliel Metriel. He is the king of a kingdom called Harlarak, as I said, and this is a very cold and not necessarily isolated kingdom, but it has been isolated for the past 2 generations, mostly because it was invaded by the neighboring kingdom of Gredren, and many of its inhabitants fled the land before returning, now that the kingdom of Gredren is actually weakening its state. Now, Hamaliel is actually not related to any royal family in particular. The Metriel house is not a royal family. They used to be important within the council present of Harlarak, and he was voted to be the first king to ascend the throne now that Harlarak is back in being independent and in having its own royal house. So, of course, as one does when this happens, you are to go and look for a plausible partner or a plausible queen or king to have by your side in order to have relations with the neighboring kingdoms, in order to assert your name and have everyone see that you are indeed still part of the chess game and the chessboard of all of the kingdoms within the realm. Now, Hamaliel really didn't know where to look or who to look for or what to think, because he, again, wasn't wasn't born royal to begin with, and though he has, of course, heard of or looked at or seen some of the royals in other places, or even the people that are part of the political councils of other countries, he has never really participated in any event. And that is when the Empire of Shazan comes in play, because Gamaliel is actually invited to an event that is actually for one of the princesses of Shazan. There are 7 children in the royal family of Shazan, 6 princesses and 1 prince, and only a few of them are still looking for a partner and for companionship. And though Gamaliel does go to the party to try and see if he can find anything that he might be interested in both alliances and maybe possibly finding friends and a partner, he is not that lucky until he meets the Princess Dalira. Now, Dalira is actually one of the older siblings in the Shazan royal family, and she is yet to be married. Unbeknownst to Gamaliel, she's always been enchanted with the idea of ice and cold, because of course Shazan is a very warm kingdom with completely the opposite type of climate situation, hemisphere, and situation as a whole. It's very large, it's still very powerful compared to Harlarak, but the two of them hit it off straight away, and Dalira is immediately taken with Gamaliel, and they have extreme chemistry between the two of them, and Gamaliel can't help but choose that in his heart this is going to be the princess that he wishes to pursue. When the end of the night comes around, so the end of the event, after the two of them have gone around and had a nice walk around the palace, Gamaliel ends up conjuring this really adorable ballerina sculpture that he can make with his aura or magic. I said this in the previous video, but I will say it very quickly now, that the realm of Esmeralda, which is the realm in which these two live in, is actually based on a magic system that is related to the concept of aura, and everyone has a specific color of aura. And of course, this is also influenced by the area that they live in, by the traditions and the cultures and the ethnicities that they are part of, and in Esmeralda's case also races, because there are literally different types of races within the world, those that are descendant from dragons, those that are descendant from elves, and so on and so forth. Like I said, it is high fantasy. And of course, Gamaliel's is mostly a blue aura that has to do with water and ice, and this allows him to create and conjure beautiful sculptures from the ice itself. Now, this is actually something that is very typical in Harlarak. They do it even for their armies and for their decorations within the palace that also has a lot of ice elements, as you can see in the background that I have drawn. But again, he leaves this specific little ballerina to Princess Dalira, and the two of them then decide that they are going to be sending letters and messages to each other to just be in contact with one another so that they can continue this relation until they finally meet in person again and they choose to get married. Of course, they do meet in between and have more than just one meeting, of course, before the big one and their wedding one, but Gamaliel basically sends Dalira little statues made of ice that he creates himself, and I do think that he actually really enjoys creating them in little sets and scenes. And with this, I mean that he basically creates them with a story in mind. I think that he is somewhat creating them with the idea of their little stories. So the first one he ever gives her is a ballerina, then he will send her a princess and a prince, and so on and so forth. But the two of them are really adorable together. I really like them, and I actually think it's an adorable concept to have him and Dalira be part of this challenge as a whole, because first of all, this picture matches with Candiii. Both this year and also last year she drew
two pictures, one of Amaliel actually creating another sculpture like this one, and another one of Dalera actually moving in Harlarak, because like I said, she is quite fond of the cold weather and that type of landscape, but she's never been there before, and so he gets to see her experience all of these beautiful things for the first time, and he is so happy and grateful that he gets to do that because he absolutely adores her. And I am actually very, very happy to see them together because they make me really soft, I'm going to be honest. Another little thing that I want to say about both the lore of this picture and the art of it in the first place is the fact that I think what really draws me into Hamaliel and Dalera as characters is the fact that Shasan, which is the empire where Dalera originally comes from, is an extremely well-off kingdom, and though it had very serious issues and problems in the line of succession and in the power line and the power dynamics that it was forced into because of the current rule having to be rid of the previous rule who was invading and creating issues with neighboring countries, I do believe that Shasan is particularly strong and well-known and wealthy, and for it to accept this type of union with a kingdom that is relatively new and, you know, getting back on its feet while also having relations with other kingdoms that are a little bit stronger than Harlarak's is very sweet on their part. I think it really shows the type of people that they are, and I really like that because it is a part of the lore that the people of Shasan are often misunderstood and the land as a whole is misunderstood. People will have very harmful stereotypes of the people of Shasan throughout the realm of Esmerin, with the exception of those that are in contact with them, given mostly part of Ilbakar and some of Ravnadaf. So it is incredibly nice to see them actually interact with each other and be appreciated in that way. As for the picture, what I wanted to say was that this picture as a whole, I wasn't necessarily the most fond of it because as I was drawing it, I wanted there to be more contrast in the whole thing, to be honest. I feel like I could have pushed the shading in Hamaliel's clothing and in his face and in his hair, but it is true that the color scheme as a whole of this character and of the world and country that he is in is extremely based on like cool colors and cool tones, and it does find positions and roots in that to begin with. But I was worried a little, and I often worry about this type of thing with pictures and art because I feel like whenever I make a choice based on the lore or based on how a specific picture looks, then I will end up regretting it merely just because it doesn't have enough of a striking presence as I want there to be. I feel like this has been the problem with most of the pieces this week. I keep thinking and fearing that they are not as striking as they have to be, particularly also because I draw all these pictures in pencils, as you can see, and of course, even though I use very thin pencils, first of all, my 0.5 pencil broke when I was doing these pieces, especially this one, which in such a small scale and character, of course, it was going to give me a problem. But I feel like the rough lines, especially when I don't change the line art color, because changing the line art color of this would have been way too much blending in, does have a negative effect on the picture as a whole afterwards. So I need to like be very careful with what I am doing, but I still hope that you guys liked it instead. Now we're moving on to day 17 photograph, and if any of you watching this are old viewers from literally over 10 years ago, from when I was first starting out this channel, you will most likely remember these characters because these two are Frederick and Fabrizio, which used to be two of the staple characters of my sketchbook tours and of a lot of artwork that I used to do when I was in high school and back in the day. I still have artwork of them from those years, but they are well over 10 years old, these two characters, and I am sure that some of you might have even subscribed to me back in the day because of them, which is crazy to think about, and I'm sure that not that many people will remember it, if at all, but October 17th is actually Frederick's birthday. And so I decided to draw the two of them for this prompt, of course, even though I'm going to be honest, I had a very hard time with this prompt, especially because I've been a little bit too harsh on Frederick for the past few years, if not just the past few months. And what I mean by that is that I've been harsh in the past few years, but particularly the past few months, I've been extra harsh. And I had to restart this whole picture. I wanted it to be a spread of photographs onto a table, but it just wasn't hitting. So I decided to scrap that and do something else, which is a photograph that they have taken during a school trip while they are on a train. And of course, it is probably a school trip that they have done when it was Frederick's birthday itself, and it is in their senior year. I'm going to talk a little bit more about them, but it is incredibly strange to think back of the fact that Frederick and I have always been a little bit similar. I've always very much related to him, even though there are other characters that have similar experiences in life to me, more so than Frederick. But as a person, in terms of reasoning and in terms of like, you know, what he was going through and all of these little elements, he does have elements and bits of me in him. And I think it's really good to see that he's still here and that him and Fabrizio are still together and going strong. But in this picture in particular, I'm going to actually talk a little bit about it without using harsh terms or anything that could possibly trigger anyone, so that it's still listenable to, even if the topics for their story are a little bit more heavy, much like the one before with Orif and his parents. So Frederick goes through something really traumatic in his second to last year of high school, and he already struggled throughout most of his teenage years with self-doubt and thinking that he might not be enough, and constantly looking to others and comparing himself, and also constantly using academic validation as his only outlet. It was always a characteristic of his that he didn't find himself particularly attractive or find himself particularly funny or easygoing or like a person to be around too much, especially when, you know, his adolescence started. And I do believe that when he feels threatened by elements that are external to him, such as new classmates coming in for particular tests in school or competitions in school, or any of these elements, he feels threatened and he feels like he no longer has power over the one thing that he actually can control, which is the way that he presents himself as the top tier student and the student council president, and just the goody two shoes without necessarily being too much of a goody two shoes. And I think that he feels like his whole identity is crumbling. He begins to spiral into thoughts of, well, more than just self-doubt, bordering onto the idea of worth and worthlessness, and just the entirety of those dark thoughts that sometimes are typical in teenagers and other times they can develop into something a lot darker. And for this very reason, he begins to question his place in the world and what he's supposed to be doing and what he does and how he is as a person. And this does spiral into something that he really shouldn't be thinking of, even to the point of possibly putting himself in situations that are dangerous, that he shouldn't be venturing into. And this was always something that he did, even back in the day when I was a teenager. I think that even us, of course, when we're teenagers, we tend to like express things a lot more roughly and a lot more directly. And I have put him in pictures, and I'm pretty sure on my DeviantArt there are still pictures of the times where in high school he was struggling, and they are clearly depicted. I do think I would like to either maybe put them privately or put them in a specific folder on DeviantArt, because first of all, I'm not sure how these were even really allowed back in the day, but I do believe that of course art is an expression, so it can be used, and I understand that. But he really does struggle and go through a lot, and he somewhat begins to hate himself because he also feels inferior, not only in his human aspect, but for those that have been around for a long time, you'll remember that he was somewhat of an angelic being, even back in the day. In our worlds and in our realms, there are many creatures that are non-human, and even though he is not exactly the same rendition of what I would call an angel, because again, it doesn't work exactly in the same way that our world and lore of our world works. He does have what I believe is easiest to understand as angelic traits, and so not only does he feel unfit in his role as a person and as a human and as a student and as a son, because we actually had him be adopted by Killian, who is one of Candii's characters. And if you remember one of our first collaborations, we ended up putting these two together in a little family unit, and they are so sweet to each other, so good, and I love them so much. And Killian does have a soft spot for Frederick, no matter what he says with his other children. I'm sorry, Killian, you know that to be true. But not only, again, does he feel unfit as a son, as a student, as a friend, as a brother, he feels unfit in the role that he was given, as well as an angelic being, as a celestial being, we could say, especially because he is one of the main defenders of the god of life and his realm. So I guess you could say his human father is Killian, and then his being father is the god of life, Perseus. And again, he feels like a failure for the both of them, which is not true. Neither of them believes it to be true, of course, but unfortunately he is in that state of mind where he does believe this to be true. And of course, the one person that stays with him through all of that is Fabrizio, whom he has been friends with since they were small children, and Fabrizio has always had this slight crush on him. But of course, during the school year and during the school year where he was struggling really badly, he didn't feel it was the right time to talk about that. And instead, he tried to talk with him and perhaps help him in whatever ways he could, but he just wasn't able to fully see what was wrong. Or rather, I should say, he was perfectly able to see that something was amiss, but it's just that horrible situation where you can see that something is wrong with a dear friend of yours, a dear relative, or whoever it is, but unfortunately, because they are shutting you out, you can't really do much unless they are letting you in. And I do believe that Fab was dealing with that situation, which is why instead in this picture, I wanted to draw the two of them on his birthday, on Frederick's birthday, actually enjoying their trip and enjoying each other's company and actually heading towards healing, because I feel like it's very easy for us as storytellers to show in stories that don't necessarily have a lore reason or a historical reason as to why specific things happen. So for example, when I talked about Orif and his story, there is a setting that is external to him that obviously makes the story feel a little heavier. And sometimes when instead there are internal struggles, I feel like sometimes artists, especially when younger, will just be throwing terrible things at a character so that they experience it. But I think that it's just as important for representation and just for the creation process as a whole to also show characters going through healing and going through what it is that it takes to become the better and best version of themselves. And that's what I really wanted to show here, just Fred and Fab together as a couple as healing comes. And now we're going on to day 18, which ironically actually features the character that I was talking about before, the god of life, Perseus. However, I will say that in this specific picture, he is actually using his human disguise. Rather, I should be a little bit more precise. He has more than just a single human disguise. Of course, as a god, and in his case, the god of life, he can travel and change and look in different ways and in different forms. But he is actually living as a human, almost undercover throughout the 19th century. So during the 1800s, specifically the 1840s, because he actually is trying to follow and observe a fellow human by the name of Dorian Nightvale. And so that's why in this picture you will hear me use his name interchangeably between Perseus, which is his name, the god of life Perseus, but also Percival, because he goes by the name of Percival Arthurian when he disguises himself as a human. Now, the reason why this picture is particularly funny is not only just because Perseus is having tea in a small espresso cup, which I thought would be pretty funny because he's so serious and the scene itself is so serious, but also because he is acting in a way that probably would be deemed somewhat toxic. But this is because he actually, in this scene specifically, he has met Dorian for the first time at least a week prior, and he has been waiting for Dorian to show up. He's been waiting for him to come back and be alive because Dorian is actually how can I explain this? I'm gonna use the simplest word. I'm just gonna say that Dorian is a reincarnation of a past lover that he has waited for a long time. But that is a very simplistic way of describing that, because I will say that Perseus is actually, his entire spiel is based off of an old Italian novella from the Middle Ages, in which a character loses a lover and there is a pot of plants involved, and this woman tries to keep her lover by planting little elements that belonged to her lover into the pot and the plants. And it's just a very long-winded story, but it is similar. There are elements that are similar because Perseus can, of course, birth little elements of life like plants and flowers and all these such things. So that's why it is based off of that, and that's why it's not exactly reincarnation, because he himself is waiting for Dorian to come back. But so he meets him, and having met him when he didn't expect to meet him, having met him a little bit earlier than he thought he would, Percy ends up having a very emotional reaction the first time he sees Dorian. He realizes that he's the person that he's been waiting for, and so he cries by himself. But when he's speaking to Dorian, he has to respectfully walk away from the room in which he has met him. However, he then researches into Dorian and finds out that he is actually engaged to a mysterious woman that goes by the name of Annalise. And this, of course, crushes Percy, because this implies that this version of Dorian, whom is naturally, of course, also named differently than his original lover, whose name was Aulos, this version of his lover no longer seems to remember him and has no recollection of Perseus himself. And for that reason, he is naturally courting someone else, which would be perfectly fine if Perseus hadn't literally waited millennia for him to get back. And for this very reason, Percy decides that he must investigate the situation in order to see if this is something that he somewhat messed up. So he messed up with Dorian not remembering him, or if it's just something that it's supposed to be this way. So he's supposed to selflessly allow him to be born again as someone else and live his life by falling in love with someone else. And to do this, he actually decides to go and visit his house with Annalise and him, and she is the one that lets him in. And this is exactly how Dorian finds Percy waiting for him in the living room. He is having tea, he's waiting for Dorian to sit with him and chat, and for them to actually clear out some doubts that have shown up from the moment that he's seen him. I really like these two. Percy is very much a scared cat. I feel like I often mischaracterize him, because there have been times where maybe Candiii and I were talking and maybe it seemed like he didn't want to be around Dorian or something like that, but that couldn't be further from the truth. He absolutely adores Dorian, but I do think Perseus is a really hurt person. He has missed him for so long, and he's been waiting for so long, and the moment he realizes something went wrong, I think it really does hit him as a person, and he absolutely hates himself for having possibly done it wrong, and so he wishes to understand exactly what he can expect from Dorian, because Dorian does have a personality that is pretty different from the one of Aulos, and so Percy has to readjust. But he absolutely adores Dorian, and he's just a little bit of a hurt, wet cat, I would say. That's kind of like what Percy is. But all in all, regardless of the lore, which I do believe it to be quite sad, and I really do love Dorian and Percival, I will say that I am actually really happy with the picture. I feel like how I was trying to say before, the pictures that I did for this week seemed to be a little not as striking as they could have been. Either the contrast wasn't there, or the colors were just kind of muddy, or the entire scene was just not really bringing the picture that I thought of to life. But I do think that this one breaks that trend. Even though the colors are warm, there are enough cool colors to kind of create the contrast, and you can actually see that I was trying to create a color palette that would be both fitting for the picture itself, but also that would create that amount of contrast between tones that wouldn't make everything blend in together, even though it's basically mostly just reds and browns. I do think the plants really helped with this, and overall I am really happy with this picture. I think that out of this entire week, this ought to be my favorite piece for week 3, so I'm really curious to see if it's anybody else's too. We are now going on to the last day of this week and of this recap, which is day 19, absence. Now, this one actually ties in with the other picture, which was past, and I wanted to talk about this picture in particular because this one features adult Orif. So the little baby boy that was in the picture for past is now a young adult here, and I wanted to show him in this very particular setting because this picture actually ties with another picture that I have done last year, in which he was looking for his sister. So in day 14, we've seen his mother pregnant with his little baby sister, and his sister, whose name is Yeva, actually becomes part of a group that Orif is the founder of, that is actually a group for the liberation of their land, or at least to a group that wants to have equal rights for the people in their land. And so Yeva becomes part of the group, and after a horrible fight that she has with Orif, a fight that he ends up regretting and a fight that he really wishes they hadn't had, she ends up leaving, and so he is tormented by her absence and wishes that he could make it up to her. Now, he does spend a little bit of time, at the very least 4 or 5 years, trying to relocate her and find her so that he can go and talk to her and clear things out. But what he doesn't expect, once he finds her, and he finds her across the lands, so across the sea from where they live in a completely different country, is that she has a little tiny baby. In fact, she's had a son in the time that he has been away from her. And it turns out that she was actually already expecting said son when they had this terrible fight, and that had been one of the contributing factors as to why she decided to leave. And of course, this is one of the main reasons why she leaves, is because when they have the fight, she begins to believe that maybe the thoughts and the ideals that she and her brother had shared for so long were now further away from her as a person. And because of this reason, she starts to think that maybe she doesn't want her child to be exposed to this type of thoughts and this type of behavior. She doesn't actually think anything bad of Orif. She's always agreed with him. While in their family, there was always a very distinct dichotomy. On one side, there is their father, who was actually a pacifist in that way. He wished to speak to people and to try and find common ground, even with those who hated them. Their mother somewhat had a different point of view. She thought that if violence in specific cases was needed, she could understand it, even though she herself had softened by naturally marrying someone who had a completely different and opposite view of hers and to hers. And then there is their grandfather, though to be fair, we call him grandfather, but he is actually their own father's grandfather, and so by definition he is Orif and Yeva's great grandfather, and he is on the complete opposite spectrum compared to their father Daniel and even their mother. He is extremely aggressive towards the people that have, of course, caused all of these issues and root problems within their lands, and for that very reason he does believe that violence could be of use in the fight that they have to have. And so Orif naturally tends to be a mixture of his parents' beliefs. I think that their father, so Daniel, whom you've seen in day 14, is a character that, dare I say, really haunts the narrative. I think that him being one of the people that is subjected to something terrible, such as a purge of a population, really does change the view that his wife and his children have of the land that they live in. I do believe that Orif seemed to be a lot more level-headed and more aimed towards somewhat of a peaceful agreement if given the chance to, but then seeing the people do what they do to his father really does change his point of view. And when this happens, he happens to be a teenager. He's 16, 17, and his sister is a little girl. So I really do think that their father somewhat hunts the narrative of the choices that they make. It's actually ironic because Candiii controls Orif. I had her design him and everything, so I am obviously going off of my own speculation and off of what I see him reason as, and she is amazing at writing for him. Whenever we do get the chance to see him in this point of his life when he's younger, I'm always amazed at the way that she is able to describe his feelings and his thoughts, and how it really does feel really raw and true to what his thoughts are. So I do believe that had that not happened to their father, the narrative would have been a little bit different, and maybe, dare I say, this fight would have never happened. I still believe that Orif would have wished to do something to change the situation that they're in, just to help the people around them, including, of course, his sister, whom he loves very much, and their friends. But I do believe that Daniel, so their father, used to be the impulse control of their family, because when his role is kind of taken over by Orif, whether or not he wishes to see it in that way, of course he's just a kid somewhat playing an adult role, and nobody would really be able to blame him for the things he says or the decisions he takes. He is just a kid thrown into something that is much bigger than him. But I do believe that with the absence of his father and with the presence of the grandfather, he does turn to more violence. But that is also because he has a lot of anger and feels wronged for what has happened to them. And he's not wrong. Like, it is true that they've been wronged and nobody deserves what has happened to them. But like I said, I think that one of the strong suits of this story is the fact that it tells the story of a family in that setting and in that situation. They aren't special because they are the main characters of it. They just happen to have been chosen to be the main character, so their story is told. I believe that's what's important about them. But overall, I do think that Yeva, being a little younger, doesn't fully understand the implication of the situation that they're in, and so she tries to also speak to other people, and she meets somebody who is actually from the other side of their conflict, and that person gives her ideas that are similar to what their father thought. And I think that's also why when she is raising Daniel, which is her son that she names after their father. She gives him thoughts and she helps him develop thoughts that are a lot more similar to what their father's position would have been like, rather than Orif's or herself's, because like I said, she does agree with him until she does start to talk to this other person. And I think what's poetic about it is that all teenagers are a little bit unsure about their future, and I think that certainly Orif and his father might have had quote unquote funny arguments or funny discussions about whenever Orif was going to get children, and Daniel probably told him that he was very happy with his children and the fact that he had Orif and his sister. And Daniel then ended up being right about this, even in Orif's view, because when he does go to the embassy of Lahirst, which is where Yeva is staying, and he meets her child, her baby, he is absolutely enamored right away. He can see that Daniel is so infatuated with him, loves him so much, gives him drawings, pictures. He's constantly trying to impress him, wants to be around him all the time. He sees him as this really cool figure, tells him everything about anything that he knows, and he immediately welcomes him into this little microcosmos that he has created with mom and with himself. And I think that Orif right away, even if he could have had any doubts, though he didn't have any, but even if he could have had any doubts, the moment that he speaks to Daniel, to little baby Danny, he immediately softens, and I think it becomes another one of his impulse controls. So in the past, he had his dad, who was just as calm and maybe a little bit more open compared to baby Danny, but when Daniel is a little kid, he is extremely open and extremely extroverted and really happy. He becomes a little bit more closed off as he grows older, but he did used to be very fun and very out there when he was a little baby. And so I wanted to show the situation of the post-fight that then led to him meeting Danny and all of these other elements that are very essential to the story. I think that this is in the hideout that his group has created, and Yeva has just left, and so he is kind of just thinking, mulling it over. It's unfortunate because he would have no way of knowing that once she left this hideout, she would have then gone home and had another fight with their mother, which would then put in motion the plan for her to leave. And for that reason, he would not be able to see her for a few years, for at least 2-3 years. And I think that it's very important to show that the absence he is feeling is, of course, the absence of her within the room, but it is also an absence of being able to talk to her, being able to talk out what has just happened from their feelings. So it's both a physical absence and something that has to do with his heart and his thoughts. And I do believe it's very interesting to look at and see. In terms of the picture instead, I do think that this one came out nice. Again, this has a color palette that sort of melts all things together and blends all things together, but I do believe that it doesn't look muddy. I do believe that it doesn't look bad. I do think that it is striking enough compared to the others, and I think that this is the word of the video, just striking. So I really hope that all of you will be happy with the results that I have had in this week's Inktober. Overall, I think I will stop talking soon, but I really hope all of you have been enjoying this year's Inktober. I hope that you will be enjoying the next 2 videos that I will make on the other 2 weeks that are left. And I really hope that you all are having a fun time listening to me yap, as well as Candiii, because she has just released another video for like her week 2, and she has been yapping about it, and I am so excited to play it over and over and over again. And I really hope that this one has kept you company, has given you maybe some inspiration for your future projects, for what you've been doing for Inktober. And that's about it. I really hope that you will be back next week to see how any of the pictures that we will be making for the upcoming upcoming week will turn out to be. And I am just really excited. And I'm also really excited for November because I do plan on making more videos. So I hope that you guys will stick around for the journey to see where I go. But yes, I'm going to stop talking now, so please enjoy the slideshow that I will be putting at the end and let me know your thoughts. I'm sending you lots of love, and I will be seeing you next time. Got tongue-tied there. I'm not gonna edit it out because it's a little funny. I will be seeing you super soon, and I am sending you lots of hugs and kisses. Goodbye for now.